Family is the root of all evil. Movie reviewers are a close second. Let's talk about Evil Dead Burn.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So today we're going to be discussing or debating Evil Dead Burn. But before we get into that, you already know what time it is. Movie recommendation time. So I do not have anything to recommend this week besides football because I've been out this whole weekend, unfortunately. Yeah, just been watching the FIFA World Cup. Good game yesterday. England versus Norway. Thankfully, England went through. Yeah, it was a good day yesterday. Yeah, I really don't have nothing this week. I've been watching. I managed this morning to watch the same thing, which I already recommended, Power, Raising Canaan, and I'm currently watching a South African series, Polygamous. It's pretty much a guy who's married to a woman, and that woman ends up finding him cheating. And then it leads into a whole love triangle. And I'm currently on like episode 7. So I haven't obviously seen everything transpire in terms of like how it ends up unraveling. But so far it's a madness. It's definitely a madness. I'll definitely recommend it. Unfortunately, there's a lot of infidelity and yeah, it's a drama show that I would recommend you guys to go and watch if you want to binge on anything. 20 around 30-minute episodes. So yeah, each episode, so I would recommend it.
So I rewatched Spawn, which is a 1997 superhero movie. Now I'd seen Spawn a bunch of times, but this was the director's cut, which I don't think I'd seen before. And I've also not seen Spawn in a while. And Spawn is very much a product of its time. It's very 90s. It basically came out of the comics boom in the 90s, where the creator basically tried to be as shocking and as edgy and as 90s tryhard as possible. And that is very much baked into the nature of the character and the character design and the powers and all of that. The story is essentially that a CIA operative is double crossed by his corrupt boss, and he dies because he is killed at the end of a mission in order to tie up loose ends. He goes to hell, and then he makes a deal with the devil to lead the armies of hell in the end times. Basically, that part of the deal is that he gets to return to Earth so that he can live with his wife until the time comes. And that then spirals out of control as he kind of gets more than he bargained for, and he has a bit of a crisis of conscience. And he kind of gets drawn into this metaphysical war between heaven and hell, where he has joined up on the sides of hell without really knowing what he got into. And it kind of escalates from there. It's undeniably 90s, like the special effects, the powers, the writing, the style, all of it. There's a farting clown demon. Like, that's the kind of thing that you will get out of Spawn. But if you are up for the tone, there's a solid superhero story in there. So that's my pick for this week.
I kind of started watching X-Men 97 on my lunch break. So I tried to watch it season 1 when it first came out. And I don't know, I just kind of wasn't into it. Like, I was kind of half watching it, half like not paying attention to it. And then I saw season 2 was out, and I was kind of just looking for something to kind of pass a bit of time. So I was like, actually, let me check these out. These are quick 20-minute episodes I can just like watch on my lunch break and kind of see what the hype is about, because it's like talked about quite highly. And actually, now that I'm watching it again and actually paying attention to kind of what's going on, I think it's actually really good. It's quite compelling, actually, in terms of the story, how kind of like mature it is in its kind of story, and in sort of the way that it's kind of like exploring kind of different aspects of the X-Men. That I wouldn't say that I'm like the biggest X-Men person in terms of like previous TV shows or the movies or etc. But I've always kind of known that X-Men is meant to be a certain level of like kind of like storytelling and like sort of different like themes, etc. Where you've got sort of the mutants living in the human world, and sort of what the best sort of approach is, and you've also got like Professor X and Magneto, etc. So I thought it was like quite an interesting sort of concept, having sort of Magneto kind of be the new leader of the X-Men with sort of Charles's passing, for something that's just kind of quick, easy, and sort of something you can digest quite quickly. I think it works well, it flows well, story's good, characters are good. To be fair, the animation is pretty decent as well. If you haven't already, then check out X-Men 97. It's an easy, enjoyable watch.
I started watching that last week, and I'm maybe 3 or 4 episodes in, and it's solid. It's proper X-Men, right? It's old school X-Men superhero stuff. The animation is good, the writing is good, the characters are strong. I'm definitely watching like an episode every couple of days, and definitely going to continue for a while. A lot of superhero media recently, especially from Disney, has kind of been like a chore, where it's not quite a lot of the time what at least I would want out of it. I mean, X-Men is just X-Men, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of refreshing.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Especially like you kind of mentioned, like other stuff that Marvel are putting out. I think this is definitely on the higher end of the sort of quality scale especially in terms of like the TV shows, etc.
And I read the other day that like there's a Green Lantern show coming out for the DCU, right? And apparently the showrunner think the name Green Lantern is silly, so they just called it Lanterns. And I don't know if that's true or not. You can never believe anything you read on social media, but it would be in character, right? Like for much of the last 15 years or so, a lot of superhero properties have been kind of ashamed of what they are, and they try to make it more serious than it really is, or more like they try to distance themselves from their core. And like X-Men 97 doesn't do that. It just literally picks up where like a children's cartoon was like 30 years ago, while recognizing that the audience has aged into being adults at this point, and so they're writing stories for them, right? That seems to be kind of the reason why it's working.
Yeah, I'm surprised at the Lantern things, especially because like James Gunn is the head of DC.
Yeah.
So he kind of like really leans into like the comic booky stuff and like, you know, the obscure characters, etc. So if that is true, very interesting that would like kind of like pass to miss out on Green Lantern because the name's silly.
Yeah, and I mean, like all the promotional material I've seen so far kind of tries to stay away from the imagery of the Green Lanterns. Like I don't know, like I'm not the biggest Green Lantern fan, but it just does not inspire confidence if out of the gate you are trying to say, hey, it's not what you think. Like this is a real show, right? Even though we are making a superhero show, it's not. It's actually a real show. That does not make me confident in, you know, your product.
Yeah, I think time will tell on that one.
Yeah.
I am actually anticipating that one. Quite eager to see kind of what they do with that. But I actually didn't mind the promotional stuff. Like I know there was a lot of complaints that, you know, they were hiding stuff. I just kind of thought it was actually pretty decent. I think it's on HBO. I think they might just be going for people that would watch X series, whatever series. Oh, this is just like another series for you to watch and like forget that it's comic booky, which I know kind of might upset a few people, but I think they're probably just trying to bring in a wider audience, it seems.
Yeah, but then why waste your time doing a superhero show if you don't want to make a superhero show? I don't get it. I'm not anticipating any show. When it comes out, I give it a fair shot, and then if it's good, it's good. If it's not, I move on, right? But it's like they've been doing this for 15 years, and it's not really been working. So why do you keep trying, or why do you not update your approach a little bit? I don't know. It is just noticeable when something like X-Men 97 comes along, even if X-Men is not your favorite thing, and X-Men are not my favorite type of superhero story. It's just refreshing how unembarrassed it is, and that's like that part itself already makes it more interesting. All right, shall we move on to the main event?
Okay, Evil Dead Burn. Daniel, can you please do your thing?
So Evil Dead Burn is the newest installment in the Evil Dead franchise, following up from Evil Dead Rise a few years ago. It follows the story of Alice, whose husband dies in an accident, and she then, following the funeral, has to sit through a weekend with her dead husband's family, who happen to be in possession of an artifact that is being targeted by the Deadites, the demons who are kind of the monsters of the Evil Dead franchise. And that then turns into a nightmare where one person after another is being taken over by the Deadites, and they cause havoc in search of this artifact. And the story then unfolds from there. So what did we think of Evil Dead Burn?
Funny story. So went into the cinema, bought my ticket. As I'm watching the movie, the audio sounded muffled, as in it sounded like the characters were speaking underwater. So I thought that was an intentional choice by the makers of the film. So I thought it was a stylistic choice. But then 20 minutes in, audio is still the same. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? So then I searched on Google. I said, is this how the audio is supposed to sound? And Google said yes. So I was like, okay, so it was a stylistic choice. 1 hour into the movie, the audio is still the same. I'm like, something's going on here. Searched up the same question again, but just like in a different type of way. And it says, yes, it's supposed to be like, this is how the audio is supposed to sound. So cool. I'm like, okay, then this is just how they made the film, which I said to myself, this is disappointing, because if the audio was clear and if they didn't choose this approach, then I would have really, really liked this movie. Compared to Evil Dead Rise, that's still my favorite out of the whole franchise. So this one is, I'll put this in second place. But by the end of the film, basically someone came in and they gave everyone complimentary tickets and said, apologies, you guys watched this movie while something was wrong with the audio. It was pretty much messed up. I was like, no way. Basically, it's very hard to say how I feel about this movie because the audio, surprisingly, even though there was subtitles, surprisingly, it did have an effect on me because I thought it was a stylistic choice by the makers. And I thought to myself, oh my God, like I could have enjoyed the movie so much more if the audio was clear. But yeah, so I would say from what I saw, not necessarily from what I was hearing, I like the film. I'm going to have to watch the film again, unfortunately, to give a proper opinion and my thoughts and feelings when it comes to how I feel about the film in comparison to like other horror movies I've watched. However, based on the aesthetic and based on the storyline alone, I liked it. Of course, they have explored the idea of ancestral evil before in like previous installments, but Evil Dead movies, they just make me feel so uncomfortable. I'll probably say just the one previously, Evil Dead Rise, which is in my top 10 horror movies of all time, and this one is not in my top 10. I enjoyed it, but it's not as good as Evil Dead Rise. But I did enjoy what I was watching. I felt like it was a bit rushed, though. I think it was more so a movie of feeling rather than trying to create a compelling story. Don't get twisted, like the subject matter was definitely important, which I think they did a goodish, all right job telling it, but I did still feel like there wasn't much story in there. It kind of felt more of a spectacle, a scary spectacle, rather than having a movie with a good compelling story, especially in comparison to Evil Dead Rise. Overall, I had a good time.
I'm going to speak on this as someone that's new to the Evil Dead franchise because I haven't seen Evil Dead Rise. I think there's like other stuff to do with Evil Dead, maybe a TV show or something like that, but I'm not familiar with it. It's not really my my wheelhouse. But my experience with it was, I mean, it was essentially just torture porn. To be fair, it seemed like there was just like a lot of gore in here, which I get it kind of appeals to some people, and I think if that is your thing, then there's definitely a lot to be kind of got from this movie. Elements of it are quite brutal, quite sort of kind of visual with sort of the violence. For me, anyways, like someone else might like see this and like watch other stuff like this and say, like, you know, this was kind of watered down or whatever. But for me, anyways, it felt quite like a hardcore, maybe some elements of like superhuman strength from certain people, because like there's definitely certain things that probably should have killed people a lot sooner than when they died in this movie. But kind of overall, as like a movie itself and like the story, I think you were kind of left wanting a little bit in the element of, yeah, they were like trying to like survive the Deadites, etc. But it just never really felt that they were like making progress to anything. It was more like they were just kind of surviving for the majority of the movie. And then obviously they had the kind of theme or the theme that they wanted to explore around sort of abusive relationships and how that plays out across sort of different family members as well that are kind of like involved in it, that maybe like aware but sort of have like different responses or reactions to it, etc. So I think that was kind of the main thing that they were trying to push. But in terms of like the protagonist in this and like, you know, having like some like strong agency and sort of working towards something and actually like sort of unraveling sort of different elements of like the mystery, etc. I don't know. I don't think there was like really much there on that front. So it kind of felt a little bit unsatisfying, and it was just a case of you're just kind of like surviving one thing to, you know, just get to sort of the next set piece, really. So it kind of felt more action, less story, in my opinion. I didn't dislike my experience in the cinema. I definitely had to like look away in certain scenes. As someone that's kind of like new to it and, you know, doesn't really watch this kind of stuff, did it make me a fan? Probably not. Would I ever like willingly choose to watch something like this again? Also probably not. But it doesn't mean it's a bad movie. It just means that it's not my flavor.
So this movie has had a bit of an uphill battle with me. I like the original Evil Dead movies, but they are very different from the current continuity, essentially. I like the first one, which was, I think, 2013. I thought that one was pretty effective. Lasted about 20 minutes into Evil Dead Rise. I just didn't like the vibes of it at all. And this one, I probably, if this was like a movie I was just watching on a Saturday night on streaming somewhere, I probably would have closed it out like 20 minutes in as well. But having sat through the entire thing, I'm just not into body horror and into torture porn at all. Like, just as types of horror, that is just not my thing. And this is the bulk of the movie, right? Like, I think we all agree on that part, that the story is kind of a pretense, and then we are really there to watch the Deadites do outrageous things, right? Like mutilate people, attack people, be vulgar, and all of that, right? So that's the brand, and that's where people show up. And I think if you want 2 hours of that, I think the movie will give that in spades. And I think that part was fairly effective, and there were a bunch of set pieces in there where they clearly brainstormed, okay, what interesting things can we do in this setting and in this environment and with these characters, and that's all fine. What kind of frustrated me was that quite a bit of time is spent on the story. This whole thing about why this family is in the possession of these ancient artifacts, and why the grandfather spent his life studying the Necronomicon, and why that drew the attention of the Deadites, and what the Deadites want with the dagger and all of that. That part, I think, is really underwhelming, where if it was just a pretense, just a framing device, they should have spent significantly less time on it. But given the amount of time that was spent on it, it was kind of empty, where what's happening is not really informed by what the Deadites want. Like, they kind of just want to break in, but it wasn't really clear to me why they were behaving behaving in that way in order to achieve that goal in particular, right? Like, it seemed to be a very transparent excuse to just do some gruesome body horror stuff, but then that kind of clashes with a lot of what happens before they actually attack, including the entire opening sequence, which made no sense to me at all. And I actually looked it up, and it's actually the main character from, or like one of the Deadites from the second movie that appears in the beginning of this movie. But if you haven't seen that movie, you have no chance of knowing this. Again, a bunch of time is spent on stuff that doesn't directly further the aim of the movie, which is to either explore this theme of family is hell or the body horror spectacle. Like, if you like this movie, it's because of it's some combination of those two things. And I think a lot of time is spent on stuff that doesn't aid that. And I think that really drags the movie down because you're spending time on stuff that doesn't matter. So I think it's competent, but quite flawed in its story. Let's talk about it.
How do you guys feel about how they explore the idea of ancestral evil?
Do they do that?
I believe so. With like the artifacts, the books.
So the problem is basically that one, like the grandfather studied the Necronomicon and was a member of this organization that tried to fight the Deadites, apparently, or at least they knew about them and they knew how to defend themselves against them, and that made the family a target. And then the family having all of these buried grievances, that would be a horror movie if the Deadites never showed up, right? Just like if you're looking at this from Alice's point of view, being stuck in this awful family, right, with these awful in-laws who hate everything you do and who blame you for the loss of their son and so on, right? That by itself is already a terrible experience. I'm not sure those two things really connect, really.
But when you say you don't think they connect, but how so?
The awfulness of the family, I don't think has anything to do with their history. They're just awful people. Like, they're jealous and angry and frustrated and alienated and resentful. But I don't think anything particular that happened in the past made them this way. I don't think, it didn't seem to me like they had a legitimate grievance. They blame Alice for the loss of, was it Joseph? Like the son in any case, right? And the living son is kind of a pushover, but he's kind of the kind of person who wants to mediate, right? Who's constantly trying to put out the fires and constantly trying to de-escalate. And if you live in a family like this, there will be somebody who is like this, who's trying to keep the argument from flaring up. Like, the family basically views, and maybe I'm looking at this too literally, but the family basically views the grandfather's pursuit of like this occult knowledge as just a hobby that wasted a bunch of time, and they just want to throw it out. Which, ironically, if they had just done that, the Deadites could have just collected the dagger from the rubbish, probably, right? And then we would have had no story. So I think we agree that those are the two major pieces of the movie, right? Their toxicity in the family on the one hand, and then the Deadites attacking because the grandfather brought this knowledge into the family and that made the family a target, right? Like, those are the two pillars of the story. I'm just asking if they connect, like thematically or causally, even just on a plot level. One way in which it does is that the family being so resentful, I think, opens them up to possession from the Deadites. And I think that was the case in the 2013 movie as well, right? Where the first person who got possessed was the sister who was trying to go through her withdrawal from drug addiction, and that's why she was weakened, and that is why she was the first to be possessed, right? And like, it's been many years since I watched it, but I think it was like this. And I don't know if in Rise it's a similar thing where the broken person gets possessed first. So maybe that's just the way in which it connects. But if you are making a horror movie that takes itself this seriously, in terms, like, this is not so if you want to see just silly fun, right? Like, I've seen a bunch of opinions about this movie, and the people who are defending it generally say people are expecting too much from this. This is just Deadites being Deadites, right? Like, this is what you get out of an Evil Dead movie. But that's true for the original Evil Dead movies, right? Where people stumble into possession of the Necronomicon, they summon the demons, and then the demons go after them, right? Like, that's basically the template. And the new continuity is tying the Deadites to some human evil, right? I think it was drugs in the first one. I think it might have been domestic abuse in the second one. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And here it's just a family being broken. There's not a lot of abuse going on, really. People are just awful to each other because they hate each other. That seems to be the case. And I'm not sure it works.
When I was saying ancestral, I just meant like it was something that was inherited and something that was passed on. Well, not necessarily passed on, but they found it. But it was just inherited within the family. And then obviously, with the passing of the son, he pretty much spread it through the family tree. So that's what I meant about, the whole ancestral concept in terms of if it was kind of like done well. So it felt like well, the mum knew. I'm sure the mum knew about how abusive her son was, and I think that was maybe like I wouldn't say a family secret, even though it wasn't conveyed well. If it was supposed to be, disguised as a family secret, but it seemed like, because there was a line between Alice and the mum where she says something about, you knew your son was like that, and I felt like her brother, I forgot the brother's name, but the coward, funny guy. It felt like he also kind of knew what the brother was like too, and the dad was pretty much a spitting image of the son, just based on he just had that kind of like persona that was very angry. I can't say just because you're an angry person you're abusive, but he seemed like he could be one of them boys. So in terms of the whole theme about ancestral, it fits with that subject matter due to the fact it is kind of like a family secret in terms of how the son is, as well as the inheritance, kind of like the representation of why I think the family was possessed, because of how they are personally in terms of like the abusiveness and the secrecy and all of that, which is why I think it was easier for each of them to get possessed, especially the father at first when, the son touched him. So I think definitely, so obviously it was passed down from the grandfather, and then it made it easier for them to be possessed due to the way that they were in terms of like the abuse as a subject matter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you kind of touched on kind of like inheriting it. To me, I kind of like viewed how they portrayed the family in more of like an enabler kind of way, and like how sort of each of the different sort of families like enabled the son's sort of
That's the
abusive
word.
behavior.
Yeah.
To Alison, where like the mother kind of was like, she knew her son was bad, but she was all about her family and like protecting the family and like her family above like everything else. So even though she knew her son was doing wrong, and even to the point where she has to let the father into the house, she knows that look, everything that's happening is wrong, but she's more concerned about keeping the family together, and sort of is looking past like all the bad and all the evil within the family. And then you've got kind of like the father who appears to be a little bit more angry, etc., and he's kind of enabled it in the sense of like he's kind of like demonstrated some of those like abusive traits and sort of kind of like toxic behaviors to his son. And obviously you got like the grandma who's kind of almost like the old racist in a sense, because she was just like kind of wary of all the outsiders and like accusing them of stealing, which is like downright kind of like horrible to them. And then of course you have like the brother that possibly knows, but too weak to do anything about it. So, doesn't really have a voice to kind of like say anything. So like the movie kind of did well in terms of like having the characters kind of, or having the family members kind of portray something different in highlighting how abusive behavior and kind of like domestic violence can kind of be perpetuated and kind of be allowed to happen, especially on something like the abuser side, because who's going to be the person that steps in and tells them what they're doing is wrong, essentially? Who's going to be the person that is going to stand up for someone that is in their family and go against, the family and something like all the questions that kind of come from that. So I think I give the movie props for portraying that in the movie. I think they could have probably tied it into the story a little bit better and kind of tied it into the grandfather a little bit better as well. But in terms of its theme and some of its ideas, I think that was handled quite well.
I think what it does well is that each of the family members is a recognizable archetype for a dysfunctional family, right? Like the mom is all about self-sacrifice, like she's been doing nothing but work to make that family work, and that extends into having to care for, is it her mother or her mother-in-law, the old woman, right, who needs constant care. And then you've got the remaining son who is a people pleaser. He's constantly trying to de-escalate. You've got the father who is just a jerk. Like he does not seem to have a reason. He does not seem to have any big grievance, really. He just seems to be just awful to everybody.
We didn't see much of him. That's the thing. Like we saw that he was an arsehole from the funeral scene, but we saw most of that after he was possessed. So that's why I'm like, what are you basing that on? Are you basing it on the funeral scene? Are you basing it after he was possessed?
So it starts at the funeral, right? Where he just rejects Alice in general. He just seems angry the entire time. Like every time the camera is on him, he seems to be just pissed off at everybody. And then is he possessed during the entire dinner? The possession happens before that, right?
Yeah,
but that also seems to bring out something that was already there, it seems.
Yeah, you're right.
It doesn't seem to be something new, right? Like they are expecting this as they go into the funeral. It's not like, hey, what happened to him? Everything was fine last time we saw each other. No, they've always hated Alice.
Do you think with Alice's character arc from like the grieving widow to survivor, would you say it was justified how it turned out? Or would you, because for me, I think the story was kind of like rushed. I don't know how you guys feel about it.
Yeah, I would question whether there is an arc. Like clearly she becomes a survivor, right? And I actually kind of like that there are moments of escalation where it's not like the demons attack and then they go, okay, everybody break out the stakes and the knives and like we're in fight mode now, right? There is a progression there. And I think it's when the son smashes in the grandmother's head with a radiator because she's possessed. Or was it the mom? I'm not sure now. But he kind of does it in a moment of panic. And then once he's done, he kind of backs off again and is kind of horrified at what he did. But that is kind of like on the ladder of escalation, for example.
I think that was his girlfriend that he bashed in, not the mother or the mother.
Oh yeah, that was his girlfriend.
I actually have a question about the Deadites, and obviously you guys have a little bit more history with this franchise than me. I was a little bit confused as to what really injured or damaged them and how they died, etc. So obviously you gave the example of like him bashing her head in with the radiator, but then you had the dad outside who took a gun and like put several bullets through his head and through his skull and like through his brain, etc. And then he didn't die, and I was like, okay, do they die? Do they not die? How did they die? Like, why did William's girlfriend die in that instance when he smashed her head in with the radiator, and then why didn't he when like he kind of blew his brains out? Because like the moment he did that like outside, I was a bit like, I mean, this is a very pointless fight, because if he can like shoot himself in the head and he doesn't die, then what the hell are you going to do against these people? Especially if you're not going to get the dagger until the very end of the movie. It's like, yeah, you can kind of slow them down, but then they're kind of shown to be like supernatural and superhuman or whatever. So it's just like, what can you really do to them?
What I think was new was a new introduction to the franchise was the weapon. Because the previous Evil Dead movie, I think the kids shredded the mom. They literally shredded her to pieces. So I was a bit confused how she came back to life at the end of the post-credit scene. So I think you are able to kill the Deadites even without a weapon, but it has to be to the point where the physical body is literally in pieces. But in terms of what was new, what I think was new, because I haven't seen before like the actual knife that they use in this movie was pretty much a new weapon that could actually kill the Deadites just from one blow. I don't remember 2032. I watched it, but I don't remember that too well. So I don't know if that was in 2013, but it definitely wasn't in the Evil Dead Rise. So I think the weapon with the knife, that was definitely a new one. But it does feel like an inconsistency, or I will say.
Well, I don't know the franchise well enough to correct you. I think in general, the Deadites are something you survive. You don't defeat them. And in the past, it's been you either destroy them completely or you injure them enough to buy you some time to get away. Like generally, that has been kind of the formula. So question for Jonathan, since you seem to be the one who is invested in this franchise, does giving people the ability to just kill Deadites, like with one blow, right? Like it seems like once you have the dagger, all you have to do is stab them once and they're dead. Does that make the story better? Does that make the mythology more interesting? Or is that a bit too much of a plot device that they will have to forget in the next movie? Otherwise, there's no story.
I wouldn't say it makes the story better due to the fact it's not really clear on how you kill them. I was a bit confused as well, like mainly with the end credit scene. The one that was possessed in Evil Dead Rise came back to life in this one. So that's how I was like, okay, I don't actually understand how you kill these things. Like, it doesn't really make sense to me. I don't think the weapon actually makes the film better. It just makes it more inconsistent. But I can forgive it, to be fair, because like I said, I enjoy everything else.
My thinking is just, will this add, like, is this like an anvil around the neck of the franchise going forward? If the Deadites are supposed to be this overwhelming evil that you barely survive, or maybe one character barely survives, but now there's actually a weapon, and if there's one, there's probably more. And now we have like an entire secret society that for hundreds of years has been fighting the Deadites, and apparently, like, it's not entirely clear how good they are at this, but they at least have weapons that work, right? Like, the question would be, why is something so valuable just lying around in an attic? Where are the other, wise men or men of wisdom or whatever they're called? Like, where are they? Why didn't they contact the family? Why are they not either taking all these artifacts or alternatively protect the family or teach them to protect themselves? Like, I'm interested in, is this a good story or not, right? And does it make the mythology more interesting? And does this open up a path for something interesting in the future? And it just seems to me just thrown at the wall and kind of not thought through. And I would be surprised if they didn't retcon this 5 minutes to the next movie.
But I feel like this was thought through, because it, like you said, it seems like it's something that's used to expand kind of like the franchise and the storyline. Because I'm hearing that they already have a new Evil Dead movie is coming out next year. So back to back, pretty much. So yeah, it seems like this is their way of expanding the franchise. Because I haven't seen the Evil Dead movies that came out, was it
80s?
80s, okay.
Evil Dead, I think, is 84 or something like that, and Army of Darkness is like 88 or something like that. Something in that neighborhood.
Exactly, so I haven't seen those two, but I'm assuming the closed stories in a sense where it's the same thing that's happening, but there's not like a continuation and storyline. So it seems like with the way that they ended this and with the introduction of the weapon, okay, this is their way of expanding the franchise, and this is their way of actually adding a continuation to the storyline. So who knows? It might be like a, like you said, a secret society of people that have actually been killing these things. That could be there. I highly doubt it, but
well, that's what we're told, right? And that's what the entire story is predicated on, because the grandfather was a member of them and he had this artifact and he was studying the Necronomicon, right? Like all of that is real.
But were they out killing them?
They seem to be at least studying them, and they seem to know how to kill them because they have the knife, right?
Okay. I either don't remember it or didn't hear it due to my audio experience, but okay.
So that's in the talkie scenes where there was no blood. So that might not have carried over into your showing. But like there's basically all the stuff in the attic. Like there's like a scene in the beginning where the grandfather is writing notes or recording notes, and he's studying the Necronomicon, right? Which in general is a bad idea. And normally that's what gets people killed in these stories. I'm fuzzy on details now. Either he or somebody else finds the dagger kind of behind a floorboard, like in the attic. But the point is, he was a part of this organization, and they were studying the Necronomicon and the Deadites, and they knew how to fight them. That is why the Deadites are attracted to the house, because they want the dagger, because it's the one thing in the world that can kill them, and so they want to secure it. I'm just not convinced that this is thought through, because number one, the story in this is not built on this, right? It's basically a MacGuffin that explains why the Deadites want to get in. But the actual story is about the dysfunctional family and the havoc that the Deadites can then wreak on the family because of that. But I don't think the things we are told about the Man of Wisdom actually informs the story, other than Alice gets the knife in the end. That's it. I think this whole tangent started when we talked about Alice's character arc, and I'm just not sure that there really is one, because she basically just tries to survive. It's a very standard survival story. Normal person is in extraordinary circumstances, figures out how to survive. She manages to do it while all the others die, and then she walks away in the end. And then the last line of the movie is she starts smoking again, which is what all her friends told her not to do, right? And I think if there's a meaning to that, I think she wanted to stop smoking so that she could start a family. And by choosing to smoke now, she's saying she no longer wants a family, right? Because look at what family does to you. And then the paramedic asks, who did this to you? And she says, my ex-husband, which is not really true, right? But like at least that comes with an asterisk, right?
That's too literal. Come on.
That's the last scene of the movie, and that is kind of the conclusion of it, right? Like that's where the whole thing gets summed up. I don't think I'm being that literal about it. I do think there are two things here. One is her asking for a cigarette means that she's sworn off her family, because the reason to stop smoking is to start a family. After everything she's gone through, she will not want a family. Although why she thinks her family will be like her husband's family, not clear, right? But it's about rejecting family, right? And the second one is her summing up the entire thing as, my husband did this to me, which I guess could just mean he is the reason I was stuck with these people, right? That could be the shorthand.
Can I add on that as well? I think it would have been more effective as well if at the start of the movie, which I actually think the dialogue and etc. in that, when they were kind of setting up the characters in this in that club, was very janky. I think that smoking scene would have been more effective if at the start of the movie she wanted to go out for a cigarette. Like she was like, oh, I'm going to go to the smoke section to have a cigarette, and then he prevented her from doing it in the sense of like being controlling and having ownership on her in the oh, I told you to stop smoking because we're trying to have a family and that's not good for the baby, etc. And then, to kind of like really accentuate that point at the end of the film is her having a cigarette, which I think the point's still there, but I just think that would have made it a little bit more in terms of like her character arc and kind of going from being controlled, being in an abusive relationship, and having like elements of your life being controlled by others, to kind of really fully taking ownership of yourself, and like you said, kind of rejecting that notion of wanting a family, etc. And just after she's kind of seen what sort of family is and what his family did to her, just kind of completely rejecting it. I think that would have like been a little bit more of a cherry on top way to do it, but I think it still works.
Yeah, I don't think it's terrible, but like that line, my husband did this to me, when he didn't, was a little bit jarring to me.
He kind of did, because at the end of the movie, he kind of came out of nowhere. I don't know where he was kind of like hiding or whatever, but he kind of came at the end of the movie, in whatever form that they sort of kind of portrayed him in. Was that meant to be like literally him?
He was gonna come out, is because obviously he possessed possessed the father at first, and then he just disappeared. But yeah, he was always gonna come out. I was wondering when was he gonna come out, so it just made sense for him to come out at the end.
That's another part of the movie where it just there's not really an explanation for it. It's kind of just like doing something cool in quoted marks for the sake of doing something cool, as opposed to it actually making sense as to why he wasn't around at all for the whole movie, just to kind of show up as like the final boss at the end of the movie. Which I don't know. It doesn't narratively. It doesn't.
But
really
was
make
that
sense.
the husband though, or was that the demon taking the form of the husband in order to toy with Alice? I thought it was a demon.
Wasn't it shown that like when he possessed the father, he kind of like burst out of the coffin that he was in, which kind of insinuated that like his actual body was still somewhat possessed or in use or whatever.
But then that's still a demon riding the body of the husband, right? It's not the husband himself.
Yeah, you're right. But once the demon's in possession of you, of course, the demon knows how to manipulate its victims because now it took over the body of its victim, so it knows his memories, etc., etc. Daniel, when you were saying, but that's a demon, I was a bit confused. What's the point that you were trying to make there? Were you trying to say you didn't like the part when Alice said, "Okay, that was my husband," and in reality it was the demon? And the totality of things is what she was trying to say. So it was like there's many meanings to it. So technically speaking, yes, it was the demon, but in the form of a husband. So it was her husband, but at the same time, her husband was responsible for much more. So I think it wasn't just that specific moment that she was speaking about. That's why I was like, you're being too literal, because it wasn't just that specific moment she was referring to when she said my husband was responsible for all of this. I think she meant like the generality of things, the totality of things. Her husband is responsible for all of the mess that she's in.
Yeah, so there's a few different layers here. Like one of them is it's an answer the paramedic will accept, right? Woman with serious wounds narrowly survives, and she says, my husband did this to me, everybody accepts it, right? Like that's the end of the conversation. Because the real answer, demons possessed my in-laws and killed everybody. It's not a valid answer in that moment. Second one is that the husband was the reason she was there, right? So, and ultimately that is why he's ultimately responsible, or at least she could, like Alice can make him responsible. And then there's the third question of what does the writer mean by having that character say that in that moment. The last one is the one I was kind of honing in on, where my question was, how is this the summary of the entire movie? I was just not entirely clear on that, and I'm not entirely saying that it's nonsense. I'm just asking, like, what did the writer mean by this? And I was kind of reminded a little bit, which movie was this, where it was I Know What You Did Last Summer last year, where in the last scene the surviving characters say all of this would have been prevented if men would just go to therapy. And that is again a similar thing. It's a sentence a survivor says at the end of the horror movie that kind of sums up, like, it's the last thing you experience as you watch the movie, and so it takes the place of like a summary, like this is the point. And in the case of I Know What You Did Last Summer, it was complete nonsense. Like, which way you look at it, that is not the bottom line of the movie, right? And so I was kind of reminded of this here, but I think in this case it's more ambiguous. I think it's more mixed, where you actually can blame the husband for quite a few things, including if he had lived longer, he would have been just as abusive as his father, for example, right? So it is not quite the same thing, but that's kind of where I was coming from when I said, why is this the last line of the movie?
Okay, I get what you mean. Okay, yeah, that is a good point.
So I have a question. Is body horror enough to carry a movie like this? It will come as a shock to nobody when I start complaining about kind of the flimsy story and about how the different pieces don't talk to each other and all of that. But that's me, right? Like, I want like a story that works holistically, right? Where all the different pieces support each other and there's a point at the end and so on, right? But is it enough for a movie like this to just be a little bit of setup and then the killing starts and that's the fun?
For me, I say why not? Because there's plenty of other genres that kind of go with that, where it's like an action movie. It's like in the Mission Impossible movie, where you know the story's not really going to be great, or like John Wick, where you know like the action set pieces, and John Wick's about to like shoot 600 people in the movie and kill all of them, and that's what you're really there for. If there's an audience there that just loves body horror and wants body horror, and that's kind of what they get a kick out of, is seeing some of the gruesome deaths and some of the really like gruesome injuries that happen in the movie. I'm kind of saying this as someone that's not familiar with the franchise, in the sense of like, maybe like some of the older movies, there were like sort of more masterful storytelling, and it's come from like a rich history of narrative. Okay, yeah. So so exactly. So in that case, if there isn't like a strong history in the franchise of like being this like narrative heavy sort of focused franchise, I say kind of why not? If people like show up and enjoy the movie for what it is, I think there's room for stuff like this. There's room for some action movies that are just action. There's room for your big spectacle to not be the story of the movie, but actually what you're selling. And I think what this movie is selling in terms of like the body horror aspect of it for me anyways, it kind of got me. It kind of sort of made me look away from the screen. It made me sort of uncomfortable in my chair on many occasions. And I think if that's what they're trying to go for, then I think they did a good enough job.
But isn't the movie saying that it's more than that by going into all this heavy stuff about like the toxic families?
So what I was gonna say, because I have actually made a good point with John Wick, but then I was gonna counter that with, wow, the subject matter is pretty heavy. The way that it was done was pretty rushed. So it was hard for me to kind of, I wouldn't say feel for Alice, because that's a bit mad when it comes to saying you don't really feel sorry for someone that's in domestic abuse, domestic violence. So I would say that I'll say, because so the flashbacks that they're showing between her and her ex-husband, at first I thought he accidentally knocked over the pan, which ended up obviously burning her. I don't know if he done it intentional or not, but the flashback seemed a bit too blurry and a bit too hectic for me to even see. You know what I'm saying? And like her story was hard for me to fully connect and resonate with what she was going through, because it was presented in such a hectic and rushed manner. So I would say for this subject matter, it was important for them to kind of like flesh it out even more. But in general, I would associate Evil Dead movies in the same manner I would associate John Wick movies. I would say, okay, cool. They're using a storyline as just like as a vehicle, whereas the actual storyline itself is the body horror. All of that is the madness, the, you know what I'm saying, the unsettling feelings that they're creating from their stakes and etc. etc. So the body gore, the body horror. That's what I would say the main story is when it comes to the Evil Dead franchise. Like John Wick, the main story with John Wick franchise, okay, there will be a reason, which will be like the vehicle. The reason for John Wick doing this is to, I don't know, or to kill the people that killed his dog. Yeah, that would be like the vehicle. But the actual bulk of the film is John Wick killing the people. So I think the bulk of, yeah, so it's pretty much similar with the Evil Dead Rise. But I think because they chose such a serious subject matter for this movie, they should have fleshed out even more.
But I don't think that's what it is. But all of the last 3 movies that form the new continuity each pick a heavy topic that the Deadite haunting is basically a metaphor for. Right? First movie was drug abuse. Second movie, I think, was abusive parents, I guess. And this one is just generally unhealthy family relationships. They're not that abusive. It's just one of those oppressive, stifling atmospheres, like that you like if you've ever witnessed a family like this, like it is oppressive. The way every word is wrong, and people are constantly waiting for an opportunity to put you down, and it never stops, and you can never leave, and all of that, right? Like it's not domestic violence exactly in this, right? It is more like that. And actually, I thought that part worked quite well, but it tries, like, it definitely positions itself as being about heavy and important things. But then a lot of the time, if you criticize the execution of that, the answer is, well, it's just fun body horror, what you expect. Like, that's how these movies are. It seems a bit like these movies are trying to have their cake and eat it too, right? They're trying to have it both ways. And I'm not sure that worked in this case. Like, I don't know. I think it kind of worked in the first one, and I don't know the second one well enough to judge whether it did there. But here, I think it takes itself too seriously for that excuse to work, right? Especially because the old Evil Dead movies are like this, right? The old Evil Dead movies are basically somebody finds a Necronomicon, summons the demons start messing with people and trying to kill them, and then in the end, a few people survive. Like, that's the formula. And there, it's not really about anything more than let's try to survive these hauntings. But the new ones are different. Like, the new ones are trying to do more, considering how much runtime is spent on just random episodes of like mutilations and so on that does not directly tie into the theme. I have to wonder, does this work?
Or something like this. Like, when is like some of these topics okay to just be kind of set up and like a canvas to kind of sort of paint the body horror stuff over it? Because, like, you know, just because we have a little bit more of a like complex theme and narrative that's kind of been woven into the story, it doesn't mean that it's the movie's kind of goal to, like, you know, fully explore it and sort of be like the most, you know, complete or like complex version of that particular topic, and to explain to you why this is right or this is wrong. For me, and like we complain about, like, you know, movies like, I think it's like Godzilla versus Kong, etc., where there's just kind of nothing going on in the story, and, you know, we say, at least just give us a little bit, just like give me a little bit to kind of hold on to, and then you can kind of go and do your like other sort of fantastical stuff alongside it. And I think for me anyways, this is an example of a movie doing just enough in terms of like its kind of themes and like setting up a narrative and like sort of setting up characters and who they are and like how they relate to each other, obviously giving it a bit of a deeper flavor, to it when you're sort of kind of touching on some of the topics that it touches on. But the movie still kind of has to do what it's there to do, and it's the body horror stuff. And I think that's just kind of like a bit more of a backdrop to it. And then maybe it's another debate of like, is it right or wrong to pick some of these sort of deeper topics for sort of movies like this? But I don't know. I don't see anything that's like too wrong with it, especially when it's like, you know, if you're looking at it from like a violence perspective, you know, you can quite easily root for a woman that has, you know, tried to like be accepted by a family and it's just being treated shit by everyone in that family. It's just kind of, you know, being rejected left, right and center by all sort of members of the family. It kind of gives you a bit of a, oh, I feel like I want to root for this person. And like, yeah, like, you know, this person was like horrible enough, or like the mother was like a bit too much of a B word that, yeah, you know, you're kind of like rooting for her to kill her in the end. I don't know. For me anyways, it felt like I got more than enough. And I think in this conversation as well, it kind of allowed us to kind of touch on both the Deadites and some of the, sort of, the gore that was in this, whilst also having like a brief discussion about sort of some of the themes and the topics, etc., which I think job well done for the movie.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different aspects there. One of them is actually absolutely did relate to Alice and did feel for her. And I think there are a few moments in this that are quite well done, right? So for instance, the dinner scene where like just before things escalate, just the way the in-laws keep trapping her in criticism, right? Like everything she says is wrong and there's no winning, and it just keeps getting more and more miserable with every moment. At that point, nothing supernatural is going on. It's just awful people being awful. I think a lot of people have like maybe have relatives, even if like your family is not like this, you might have a relative who is like this or something like that, or you know, a friend's family. Yeah, maybe you were at a friend's place once growing up and their family was like this or something like this, right? So I think that was very relatable and very plausible. There's also a moment between Alice and the mom where the mom essentially says, look, I've been making sacrifices my entire life and look what it got me, right? And I think that's in the context of, you know, she looked after her children, and then she looked after the husband, and now she has to look after her mother-in-law, I think it is, right? Because now she has dementia and it needs 24-hour care. There are moments in this that I think tie into the theme quite well. I'm just asking, given that the movie is trying to be about this, isn't the body horror just filler? And if it's not filler, then how does it support the theme it's trying to talk about? And should it? Like, you're absolutely right that really bad action movies and horror movies are just running away from things, or just action, or just punching. And this is not just that, right? My thing is just, if a movie tries to do something, it's totally appropriate to ask, okay, does it do that well? I think each individual piece in this is pretty good. I'm just not sure the different pillars of the movie connect to each other. And because they don't connect, there isn't much of a story here, right? Because ultimately, Alice kind of puts up with the bullshit for a while, and then the Deadites attack, and then she runs away, and then she survives, right? Like, there's not much of an arc there, and there's not much of a story there for her. And I don't even think she, like the change is that she was kind of sitting through the awfulness in the beginning, and by the end, she's refusing to put up with any of it. But that's also because they're now trying to kill her. I'm just saying, does Alice actually have a story other than being a survivor in a horror movie? And should she?
Could you say, because obviously the main theme is domestic violence, it kind of adds on to that, because a lot of the times it's hard for us to relate to someone who's been through domestic violence.
It's not domestic violence. It's a toxic family. Those are different things.
Well, but domestic violence is still a part of the storyline.
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it's like outright like domestic violence where he's like, you know, beating on her, etc. But there's an element of the son's being a piece of shit to her, and you know, she's got this scar. Essentially, the movie implies that he kind of almost did it intentionally to her. So like, there's that element of like controlling and like, you know, I wouldn't say it's like strong violence against her, but there's like an element of an abusive relationship between him and her. And then how I saw it in terms of like the toxic family is like, again, it's how each of like the family members kind of perpetuate it, whilst also kind of reflects on being a toxic environment for Alice in that situation, without kind of like rehashing everything kind of like all over again. It's like, you know, the father's like an angry person and like is a bit of a toxic person and is essentially passed that down to a son. So it's not like directly that there's domestic violence and like he's kind of toxic or whatever, but like it just kind of shows like a bit of like a correlation between like father and son. And like the mother, sort of, you know, she's toxic and she's like negative towards Alice because she's trying to protect her family, and she kind of like has this like resentment towards Alice because she's trying to protect her son, etc. etc. And like, you know, the other family members kind of like tie into it. I wouldn't say it's like outright domestic violence, but there's like elements of it that kind of like shape how people are towards Alice in the movie, whilst also kind of also being, you know, just toxic in their own right, and just like kind of being just bad people overall as well, and kind of Alice stepping into that environment.
The way I remember it is that the thing about the burns, that was an accident that happened in the context of a fight, and that was a kind of a sign that the husband was prone to losing his temper, right? And so if the relationship had gone on, if he hadn't died in the accident, it would have turned abusive and violent at some point. I would just draw a distinction between that and how the in-laws behave, like, or the other family members behave towards each other. Because I actually think it is kind of important that that is what this movie is about, right? This is not about Alice being the victim of violence. It's a destructive family culture that Alice is trapped in. I do think that is different. Everything they say and do is tainted by these toxic personalities, right? Like these webs of resentment and grievance and just trying to tiptoe around each other because you don't know what the other person might say next. And especially how oppressive that is when nobody's doing anything, because the dread of what could, you know, ruin the entire day, or that is something that is kind of in the air, right? It's there, like how in the funeral scene, everything Alice does is wrong, right? The way she dresses, nobody cares about how she feels, that she might not feel up to dressing up. That just showing up is difficult enough for her, but they have to critique the fact that she's wearing sneakers, right? Or the fact that she didn't prepare a speech. Like no question of maybe she's just not up to it, so maybe somebody else should give a speech, right? That scene kind of really communicated like a lack of compassion and empathy on any level. But you might say that she's not quite doing her part in that funeral scene, but also there's a reason why. And the reason is that she's grieving and she's barely holding it together, and she cannot count on anybody other than her friends. Like she cannot count on her family for any kind of support. And then that's kind of repeated in the dinner scene, right? Where like at that point, the father is already possessed, and that's kind of where it's escalating. But again, it's a similar thing, like this question of, will she carry on the restaurant? Like there is no correct answer to this, right? Like everything she says makes it worse. And she's terrified of saying anything because she's trying to play four-dimensional chess, like trying to anticipate which answer will upset them the least. Yeah, again, it's not a conversation about, okay, running this restaurant was the son's big passion project, and she might carry it on or she might not. Like you could just easily say, well, she's not a chef. She doesn't know how to run a restaurant. So it would be run by somebody else who's not family in either case, right? Because she just does the finance, right? So is that even carrying on the legacy at all? Or should it end here on a high note? Like in a normal family, that's the kind of conversation that would happen. But here it can't happen because of the way the parents are. That's the kind of thing that I think is done quite well. But we've maybe belabored this point a little bit, but I do think the bulk of the movie is about just the fact that these people cannot talk to each other, and they drag each other down, and they make each other's lives miserable, mostly in an emotional way. That kind of allows the demons to take hold, and then it kind of escalates from there. So I think that's probably the biggest part of the movie. Shall we wrap it up?
Yep. All right. So last thoughts. What I will say is, I need to watch the movie again because they messed up the audio for me. But from what I saw, I liked it. I am a fan of the Evil Dead franchise officially. I've said all that I wanted to say, so I'm just gonna give it a rating of 7 out of 10.
Yeah, I think I kind of concur on that. Again, kind of go back to the top of this. Not really my type of movie, and not one I'd probably check out again or watch again or recommend or anything like that at all, just because it's not what I would usually watch. I think for what it is and for what it tried to do, I think it did a commendable job, and I think it's if it's a bit of you, then I think it's definitely worth checking out. I think it's a bit of fun. If that's your thing, I would also give it a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, so this is definitely not my kind of movie. I don't think I would have watched this movie just on my own initiative. I think the body horror is competently made, and if you want that, I think the movie definitely does that. I think it's sufficiently creative where it comes up with different things to do in that setting. I just think the story is the weak point, because the whole, like, if this was just a setup for like a family is in a vulnerable state because of how they are, and then the Deadites take them over and start killing, and then we get a whole bunch of set pieces, that would be one thing. But the movie is trying to do more, and I think it is flawed in the way it executes that, where it ends up not doing a whole lot with its theme. and it kind of just checks a couple of boxes where it kind of mentions the kinds of things you would expect in a movie about an abusive family or in or a toxic family. As I was watching it, I kind of was waiting for it to get to a point, and it then never quite did. And in the end, the magic MacGuffin just wins the day. Like we've said, there's no clear sense of what kills a Deadite other than that. So anytime you have like a monster like that, it's a little bit artificial where the movie goes on for as long as it goes on and then it's over. Like there's not much to achieve for the characters in a way other than just surviving. And I always find that a little bit frustrating. In general, I just didn't enjoy watching it for all of those reasons. So it's a 5 out of 8 for me.
All right, guys, thank you very much for tuning into today's episode.
If you reach this part of the episode, as always, we appreciate you checking us out, giving us a listen, and just generally being supportive. And as always, if you enjoyed our discussion, please tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a whole bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, guys, we'll catch you next time. Au revoir.
Bye-bye.